Flowers in the Wild, Goals for the Zoom program. I am going to guide you to recognize some common wildflowers that bloom in the early spring and early summer around you. You may not recognize most of them, or you may recognize most of them, and you may learn something new during this program. I would like to introduce you to botanical names, genus, and species established by Carl Linnaeus in 1753. They are written in Latin or Greek and difficult to pronounce, so bear with me. I will add family names for the bigger picture. And I encourage you to go out and see the plants for yourself using your hand lens for close-up look, smell them or the air around them, touch them, but don't pick them. Like everything in nature, conservation is always important. So I am going to start this with a quote from Sheryl Crow. Because of COVID-19, I can't take you on a walk. These times that we're living in are different, so we're encouraged to do distance programs. But according to Sheryl Crow, and this is how I feel, no matter how chaotic it is, wildflowers will still spring up in the middle of nowhere. And they are, today they were just everywhere. So you have to get out there, and you'll see many of them on these slides. I'm going to start with the first early flower that you'll see maybe in March, coming through the snow. Today, you'll just probably see the leaves unless you're in a place where they're blooming late. This plant is skunk cabbage, Symphylocarpus foetidus. It's in the arum family. It has a skunky smell in the air when it's about blooming. It likes wildlands, wetlands, swamps. The first thing to appear is the purple heat-absorbing spathe, which you see here in this picture. It's like a monk's hood around the spadix, which is the flower, a tight cluster of male and female flowers together. In this picture, you'll also notice that there is a fly pollinator. Because it's warm in there, so it's coming out, the first flower that might pollinate. The flowers start blooming from the top. This is a picture of a flower that's underneath that spathe. It's called the spadix. The female flowers bloom first and then the male flowers because they're shedding pollen to pollinate the females. You'll see in this picture a beetle pollinator. So already we've seen two pollinators. What you see, what happens in here is a process called thermogenesis. The flower bud, as it enlarges, produces heat. It burns starches from its stored underground root system, which is pretty massive. It uses oxygen to break down sugar and produces heat. It can even melt ice and snow and have inside temperatures in the low 70s. This process usually starts when temperatures are above 32 degrees. It prevents the plants from freezing. I imagine many of you love to get out there and in the ice and melting snow, look for this plant because it really is growing at that time. And what I was going to say, it even attracts honeybees that don't generally come out at that time of year. But if you are a starving honeybee, you might want to find this warming hut that is full of scarce, rich pollen and protein. This plant smells of rotting flesh, so it attracts fly pollinators. This smell is caused by chemicals cadaverine and scatoli. The odor is intensified by heat production. And you can smell this with all parts of the plant. So smell this plant and smell the air around it. The color of the spathe, the purple color, resembles the color of carrion, which allures insects, including the carrion beetle. It's a good place for spiders to seek their prey. Now, leaves start to show up after the flower has been pollinated, and the spadix, which again is the flower, turns down and pushes into the earth so it can develop fruit. The fruit becomes a size of marbles in late summer, and I've never seen that. When the leaves appear, you can confuse them with the plant false hellebore or Indian poke. The leaves of the skunk cabbage are on the left and they look like savoyed cabbage. The leaves of false hellebore are on the right and they look like they have ridges. So to tell the difference, smell the leaves, crush them a little bit and smell, because the skunk cabbage will smell a little skunky. Also, you can look around the base and you may still see part of the spathe or the spadix in those tight clusters. The Native Americans used to smoke skunk cabbage leaves. It's an early season food for black bears, pheasants, slugs, and snapping turtles. Now, in the fall, it's interesting, especially when you go to the wild gardens of Acadia, where the skunk cabbage is, you'll see these long shoots poking up. And you think, oh, the plant's going to bloom again, but it's not. It's the new plants for next year with the flower bud and the leaf bud. It takes 7 years for new plants to be large enough to flower. That's the skunk cabbage. Now we'll go on to one of our favorite early flowers that we find on the mountainsides, the heaths, places where you find blueberries. It's called the Mayflower, and it usually does appear in early May, sometimes late April, depending on the weather. It's trailing arbutus, Epigea repens. It's in the heath family. It has tubular flowers that are pink or white with 5 petals. Its Latin name repens refers to the plant's creeping and rooting stems. Sometimes you have to look under the leathery leaves and stems to actually find the flower early in the season. Once you do, be sure to smell that flower, because it smells to me like the dainty fragrance of orange blossoms. The Pilgrims, it was the first flowering plant that the Pilgrims saw, according to folklore, and they named it the Mayflower. The queen bumblebee is its primary pollinator, and seeds are dispersed by ants. It's a May delight. In old times, they used to pick Mayflowers and hang them in May baskets. We don't encourage that now. Next, we have Spring Beauty, or Claytonia virginiana. It's also known as Quaker's Ladies, Patience, and Fairy Spud. It's in the purslane family, and it likes moist woodlands, often mostly deciduous woods. It has 5 white petals with pink stripes. It's very dainty. The 5 stamens have pink anthers, which seems to me very unusual. So if you look closely at this plant and you see those little pink things, that's the male pink anther that is going to have the pink pollen on it. That is the male reproductive structure. The pistil in the center is a 3-parted structure, and that's the female reproductive structure. The leaves are lanceolate, and they're kind of leathery. The plant opens up on sunny days and closes on cloudy days. It reseeds itself and colonizes underground. The pollinators are Spring Beauty minor bee, Andrena urgene. This bee flies in and flies off with pink pollen on its legs, something I have not noticed, but I will definitely look for the next time I'm around Spring Beauty. The corms and underground part of the roots are actually like tubers or potatoes, thus it got the name fairy spud. This is eaten by mice and chipmunks. The leaves and flowers are edible, but like all plants, picking them will lead to sparsity, and so with conservation we don't encourage it. The next plant I have, which is such a joy to see in the early spring because of its bright yellow flowers, is marsh marigold, Caltha palustris, also known as king goblet of the marshes. Part of its name is believed to be from Mary Gold. Medieval churches gave a tribute to the Virgin Mary in May, so the Mary Gold. Another name is cowslip, meadow boots. It's in the buttercup family. This plant has no true petals, but it has 5 to 9 petal-like sepals. They're outer leaf-like structures that enclose and protect the flower bud. These plants look like oversized buttercups. The leaves are toothed and heart-shaped or kidney-shaped. The stems are grooved, and then they develop seed pods. The seed pods are poisonous if eaten, but wood ducks seem to like them. It's believed that marsh marigold is a living fossil from before the last ice age. Here's a picture close up of the marsh marigold so that you can see into the reproductive structures where you might find nectar. Insect pollinators see guidelines on the flowers using ultraviolet wavelengths that lead them to the dark center of the flower where nectar awaits them. So I would advise looking at those grooves to know that you've got a groovy stem, looking for those buds, getting down there closely for the fruit. Okay, the next plant I'm going to talk about is the trout lily. And you can find trout lily in these parts. Sometimes you may only see the leaves. Erythronium americana, it's in the lily family. It has yellow bell-shaped flowers, 6 petals, 3 are sepals and 3 are tepals. And we won't get into all that vocabulary right now, but just so you know, they're not true petals, like many flowers. These are early bloomers before the leaves on the hardwood trees are out to block the sunshine from them so that they can photosynthesize. Bumblebees need it's pollinized by bumblebees, the queen bumblebees and soldier beetles, because you need long tongues to get into the nectar. Only 1% of the plants bloom each year. Large colonies form from underground corms and runners. It takes 4 to 7 years to maturity. First, 1 leaf is produced, but no blossom, and then 2 leaves, and then you may get a blossom after that. Now, part of its name comes from the appearance of its leaf. The mottled leaf is thought to look like a speckled trout and appears at a time as a harbinger of the trout fishing season. That's one theory. Or it could look like the spots on a fawn's back or the birth cycle of deer. When 2 leaves emerge, they appear to be like a snake's tongue. Thus, the label of adder's tongue as another name for dogtooth violet. So here we have a colony of them. And I've already talked about the flowering and the maturity, but there's something special that happens with other plants too, but I will talk about it here. There's a symbiotic relationship with ants and this plant, and the terminology is called myrmecochory. So ants exchange the lipid-rich appendage on the seeds in return for dispersal of the seed, which helps both the plant and the insect. I'm going to move on to wood anemone. That's blooming now. You can find it in some of the woods, even along the roadside. I've found it along the streams. It's a very dainty flower. Anemone quincophilia. It's also known as windflower, woodflower, mayflower, nimbleweed. It's in the buttercup family as several others that we've talked about. One theory is it gets its name from Animos, the Greek wind god. It's also a symbol for sickness, according to the Egyptians, and Chinese use it as a symbol of death, which doesn't seem so great for this beautiful flower. The flower is white. It's a white solitary flower with 5 petals. It has a whorl of 3 stalked, deeply cut leaves that appear to be actually 5 cuts, but it's really only 3, but 5, thus cinquifolia. It's spread by rhizomes, like many of these flowers are, these underground modified plant stems. It is pollinated by hoverflies and other insects. It is poisonous, and the acrid oil of the plant is irritating. This is one of my favorite early plants, partially because the leaves are so bright and they're evergreen. So you notice them early in the spring and you can't wait for them to bloom. This is goldthread, Coptis trifolia, and this is also in the buttercup family. The name means to cut in 3. So the shiny evergreen leaves that are sharply toothed are cut in 3. It's also known as yellow snake root, golden root, and canker root. Plant has 5 to 7 white sepals. The petals are small yellow club-like structures. So if you look at this plant, it's not actually those big white things that are the petals. It's those little small yellow things in the center. So the reason this plant is given this name is partly due to the color of its root. The root is bright yellow or golden, and it's hairy like gold threads. Some people dry this root and use it for canker sores. It's an astringent, it's bitter, it contains berberine compounds, but it is useful for canker sores. I have tried it myself. It's thought to have antifungal, antibacterial, and anti-tumor properties, but this could be, folklore also. It also has been used in yellow dyes. This part of the plant I do find in winter, even though it's snowed 2 or 3 feet, or if it's iced over, I've still found the dried fruit capsules in a star-shaped cluster. It bears these little black seeds that actually survive the winter. And I've used them when I've taught winter weeds, and I've been so excited to actually see them. Now this plant we're all familiar with, the common dandelion, but it's an important plant and pollinator. Taraxacum officinalis, it's in the aster family. It's an ancient plant thought to have evolved over 30 million years ago. It only has ray flowers that are long, flat, strap-shaped petals. A single head can have over 100 rays that look like tiny petals of orange and yellow, and they overlap in the center. So you see there are no disc flowers in the center. The flower head is surrounded by green bracts. It's an early season source of nectar and pollen for bees. And it's food plants for the larvae of butterflies and moths. Also nectar for the pearl-bordered fritillary butterfly, and important food for birds. So early on, you see it has a bee pollinator. The French called it dent de lion, tooth of the lion, and this is partly because of the deeply lobed and toothed basal leaves. There are no scales on the stem, although they do appear hairy. When you break the hollow stem, you have a milky white sap that can make your fingers brown. Probably you all remember making crowns of dandelions, either with your children or when you were young. The dandelion is said to represent the 3 celestial bodies: yellow for the sun, the puffball moon, seeds the stars. The seed head is carried by the wind up to 5 miles. And I imagine some of us have also helped disperse the seeds when we've blown on this seed head. Dandelions on your lawn are genetically identical to the parent plant, most likely. This is a process or a word called apomixis. Seeds are produced without male fertilization, and they become maternal clones. It's quite a scientific process that I really can't explain because I'm not a geneticist, but it does have to do with genetics. All parts of the dandelion are edible. We're still eating the dandelion greens raw in our salads. My grandmother used to dig up the roots and the greens and boil them and can them. I've made dandelion wine that's delicious. A friend of mine made a dandelion cake with the flowers. The roots are medicinal, and the plant is high in vitamins and minerals and potassium. A plant that looks like dandelion and can be confusing is coltsfoot, Tussilago farfar. It's in the composite family also. Now, if you look at this plant, you see something different from the dandelion, even though it's that bright yellow color. It has female ray flowers, like the dandelion has ray flowers, but it has male disc flowers in the center. So this gives you a good look at them. The flowers appear before the leaves, and you will see these flowers all over this year, and they grow in poor soil, clay-like soil. Now, when you compare them to dandelions, you look at the stems here, and they have scaly bracts on the stalk. But the flowers have their ups and downs. The flower head is down when developing and on cool and cloudy days, and up at night. It's up for pollination and down after pollination, then up for seed dispersal. There are few pollinators in April, but it's looking for them. The leaves are the shape of a horsefoot or a colt's foot, and they appear after the flowers have been pollinated. And you can see that these flowers now have gone to seed and they're up for dispersal. This is a picture I took recently of a place, very unusual place where this was growing, in a stream bed that was just big rocks and no soil and a river gushing. So it does grow in all sorts of places and is very hardy. Now this dainty flower is blooming now, and I like to think of it as carpeting the forest floor and a reflection of a starry night. It's the star flower, Trentalis borealis. It's in the primrose family. Trentalis means a third of a foot. Many plants are a third of a foot, so there's some confusion of how it got this name. But the very rare thing about this plant is that it has number sevens, 7 sepals, 7 petals, 7 stamens, which is a rare number in plants. It does have 5 to 9 leaves. The leaves are a solitary whorl at the apex. It's pollinated by native bees and the seraphid fly. There's no nectar in this flower, only pollen. The seeds need cold stratification for germination. The seeds are disseminated by insects, and chipmunks will eat the seeds. I saw a lot of chipmunks running around today, but the flower's just coming out, not the seeds. So you can see these 7 petals very well to help you identify this flower and the whorled leaves. Next, we have a flower that's blooming everywhere now, and the ground is carpeted with their leaves. The Canada Mayflower, or false lily of the valley, Myathenium canadensis. Maya meaning May, Thenium flower. It's in the Mayflower family, but used to be in the lily family. Sorry. The flower is really only 1/8 of an inch. It has 2 petals and 2 sepals and 4 male stamens. The female reproductive part is white in the center. So those stamens are yellow. This picture doesn't really show the color that well, but if you look for yourself, you will recognize the parts of this plant. The leaves appear first as an inch-long vertical spike. So if you went out in the woods and you just saw all these green spikes coming up, that's the first appearance of the Canada Mayflower leaf. It can have 1 to 3 leaves. They're heart-shaped at the base. They have parallel veins. And if it's only a 1-leaf plant, it's infertile. So when you're out looking at a carpet of leaves, just count how many plants have flowers out of the giant clone that spreads underground, because not many of the 1-leaf flowers, you won't see any flowers on the 1-leafed plants. They really have to have 2 to 3 leaves before they create a flower. So as I said, it grows as a giant clone that can live up to 60 years as it spreads underground. The fruit is a red speckled berry like a translucent bead. Thus, another name given for the plant is the bead ruby. It often lasts through the winter. It's edible, but not very tasty. This plant has extensive roots and rhizomes underground with some tuberous portions like miniature potatoes. Some have used the roots as a good luck charm. This plant indicates a mature forest with strongly acidic soil. This flower is very common on your lawns and in the woods. There are actually I think 20 species that are in eastern New England, eastern North America. I think that's on my next slide. It's the common blue violet, Viola papillonacea. It's in the violet family, and it's a food source for the larvae of fritillary butterflies. has heart-shaped leaves, which you can see in this picture. This is another of the 50 species of violets in eastern North America. This is the sweet white violet, Viola blanda. The violets have nectar guidelines, like road maps for insect pollinators. They have two kinds of flowers. One flower has 5 petals, and it's on the top of the stalk, and that's the flower we usually see. But under the lower leaf, by fall, there's a second flower that I've never found that opens but only self-pollinates. That never opens. The flower never opens, but it self-pollinates. So I really can't explain that part, and I've never seen it happen, but I'm going to be looking for it this year. Violet seeds are 3-valved capsules that explode and travel up to 4 feet when they explode. I'd like to be around to see that happening, or I wonder if you can hear it happening. Ants like the oily substance on the seeds also. And all parts of the violets are edible. I've been putting the flowers and leaves in my salad. They're high in vitamin C. You can make violet jelly, and you can make candied violets. Go out and help yourself, they're plentiful. Here we have the sessile-leaved bellwort, Uvularia sessifolia, also known as wild oats, marybells, or strawbell. It's in the autumn crocus family. Sessile means the leaves have no stalk. They're attached directly to the stem. The flowers are drooping pale yellow with 6 petals that slightly curve outward. It gets its name because the flower resembles the human uvula. So if you look in the back of your throat and you say, ah, that's the uvula, and this plant is supposed to look like that. I'm not sure it really does, but that's what it says. It spreads with large colonies and supposed to be medicinal, used by Native Americans for snake bite, wounds, inflammations. And evidently the leaves and roots are edible. I have no experience with that, and I wouldn't encourage it. And this flower is in bloom now also. Like many of these flowers, the painted trillium, Trillium undulata, is in the lily family. It's a monocot. It has 3 leaves. Tri means 3, so it has 3 leaves, 3 sepals, 3 petals. This one is white with crimson blaze in the center. It takes 6 years to the first bloom of this plant. First, 1 rudimentary leaf, then a single real leaf, then 3 leaf shoots, and then the flower. The fruit is a red berry that develops into a capsule that contains seeds covered with a sticky material. This fatty appendage is loaded with proteins and lipids, and it's called an elaiosome. It is an ant delicacy. Ants take the seed and carry it into their tunnels to feed their larvae. The seed is discarded in these underground tunnels in a compost of droppings and dead ants. It can be moved 30 feet from the regular plant. I call them ant gardens. Beetles and flies also pollinate trilliums. Trilliums can be dispersed by deer and yellow jackets also. This is a picture of a red trillium, Trillium erectum, which has maroon petals, which smell like stinking meat to attract fly pollinators. Another word for this plant is stinking Benjamin. If you're near many of them and you smell them and think it's going to be a sweet smell, well, it's not. They really do stink. Another name for the red trillium is wake robin, because it apparently has bloomed in the past when robins return, but robins are returning sooner. So that name might not hold. Red trilliums lack nectar for bees. They do have pollen. Here we have a flower that you've probably seen. This flower, when it does grow, is pretty expansive. I have 1 little plant in my yard. I think the deer eat it. This is Jack in the Pulpit, Arisamia trifolium. It's in the arum family, like the skunk cabbage, which is often a tropical plant, arum plants anyway. So when you look at this plant, trifolium, you look at leaves that are divided into 3 or more. Usually it has 1 or 2 leaves. The pulpit is the part of the plant that you see that is purple and green, and it's going over the top of the pulpit. So it's the spathe that you're seeing. The spadix is the tiny flower inside the pulpit, usually Jack or a Jill with tiny flowers at its base. So it's hard to see in this flower, but if you look inside, you will see the pulpit or the spadix. Insects are attracted to the bright colors and to the fungal odor of this plant. Fungal flies are attracted. It's hard to climb out sometimes. So there is some thought that maybe this plant will become carnivorous in the future and have a diet of insects. So is this plant a male or a female? This is a plant that can change its sex depending on growing conditions, stored food, and the size of the underground corm. Often the first plant that comes up, the first year or two, is a male because it hasn't stored much energy underground. And a male plant does better in poor soil conditions. And it's a smaller plant also. Males have thread-like pollen structures at the base of the spadix or jack. Went ahead of myself. Rich, moist soils favor changing the plant's sex to female. That seems rather strange. Females have tiny green berries around the spadix in the pulpit. Only females produce seeds, and the plants are usually larger. I've always referred to them as Jill. Sometimes you can tell the sex by the number of leaves, but not always true. Females often have 2 leaves, males 1. Jack in the pulpit berries in the fall are eaten by wood thrush, turkeys, pheasants, and other birds. First, when you see them, you saw in the other picture, they're green, and then they turn red. And then when they're eaten, they look like a checkerboard of red with black underneath. The roots contain large quantities of calcium oxalate. They're inedible because they cause burning in the mouth. But do you know that some foods we eat also contain calcium oxalate in minute quantities that don't harm humans, like my favorite, chocolate, spinach, parsley, broccoli, beets, and Brussels sprouts, to name a few. And deer will eat the roots of this plant. That's enough about Jack and Jill in the pulpit. Next, we have blue-bead lily, or Clintonia borealis, borealis from the north. That's also in the lily family. DeWitt Clinton was an 18th century politician and botanist, and he had many plants named after him because he really was out in nature and discovering plants. This flower has 6 yellowish-green petals that are bell-shaped in 3 to 6 drooping clusters. It has 3 broad basal leaves that are smooth but thick and leathery. They're usually about 12 inches high with parallel veins. They come up first and you wonder, oh, are these going to be wild leeks? They have no smell to them like wild leeks. It gets its name also for the blue fruit clusters that form on the top of it. They're usually 3 to 6 in a cluster. These are pretty inedible. The plant grows in moist woods with acid soil. And here we have pink lady slipper, or Cryptidium acale, the moccasin flower. So acale means without a stem. It's really a leafless, I don't see my notes, but it's really a leafless scape rising from the roots. It's called moccasin flower from the Greek word cypress for, sorry, I don't see that word because people are in the way, for flower, I believe, no, for Venus, and pedillion for slipper, so Venus slipper. They're pink to white in coloration. They have a pouched flower with 3 petals and 3 sepals. 2 basal leaves that have creased veins. They're light green and they're kind of hairy. It grows in acid soil and mixed woods. The lady slipper has a symbiotic relationship with the fungus Rhizoctonia. The lady slipper seeds don't store food, so they need the help of the fungus for nutrition. The fungus breaks down the seed coating to aid in germination. The fungus also interacts with the underground corms to allow nutrients from the soil to reach the lady slipper. What does the fungus get in return? Well, the fungus gets sugar from the lady slipper when it's photosynthesizing, so they live well together. It takes 5 to 7 years to mature a plant into a flowering stage. It requires bee pollination. Bees get fooled by the sweet odor and bright color and make their way into the pouch, only to find no nectar. There are some obstacles to escaping, but they follow the hairs under the pollen mass to get out. While doing so, they may fertilize the stigma on the way out. So it's hard to transplant lady slippers because they really require that soil fungus. The hairy scapes, or the stem, contains a fatty acid that is toxic to animals, and people can get a rash from handling them. It matures to a capsule with hundreds of thousands of seeds. Half of the seeds will germinate. Less than 2% of lady slippers get pollinated. It's a long-lived plant, can live for 20 years, and it's a protected plant. Here we have the pitcher plant, Sarracenia purpura, huntsman's cup, trumpet pitcher. It's in the pitcher plant family. It's a carnivorous plant with deep maroon blossoms, brightly colored leaves that attract pollinators. These flowers are kind of waving in the wind like flags for insects to come on in. The insects are attracted to these bright colors and the sweet nectar-covered glands. There's even a sweet smell that attracts them on the outside of the leaf. Footing is tenuous, however. The leaf is smooth and slippery near the mouth of the plant. And it's easy for the insect to slip right into the water-filled cup. Bristly hairs point downward, and so escape is unlikely. Take a look into this plant. Look closely, because you most likely will find either ants, spiders, or beetles inside. This plant gets little nutrients from the bog, so it requires pollinators and insects to come into its pool. Once it's in that pool, the plant secretes digestive enzymes and acids to break down the dead insects, which do provide nutrients for the plant. There are, however, insects that live in the plant as parasites. They have a chemical protection from acids. The pitcher plant mining moth, Erexa cocoricea, digs out a nest and lays eggs on the leaves. The larvae feed on the entire plant for its life. There's also a Sacrophagia fly that's immune to the digestive enzyme and feeds on the dead insects inside the pitcher. It pupates and emerges as an adult that flies away out of the pitcher. So it's a very interesting plant. Be sure to take some time to look inside and to smell, feel, don't pick. Now we're getting down to the last few plants. Indian cucumber root, Medolia virginiana, is in the lily family. Medolia refers to the Greek goddess Medea, who had some kind of ability to predict medicinal things and talk about medicinal properties of the plant. The root is said to be diuretic. The leaves and berries were used to treat convulsions by the Iroquois. The leaves are veined and parallel in two-tiered whorls. The yellow to green flowers turn upward and hang down from the upper whorl. It shows the purple stamens that have the pollen for the pollinators. So they're really advertised here. The berries, the plant is about 2 feet high and it grows in shaded woods. The berries on the top are dark purple. The leaves turn yellow in the fall with some purple lines that make you think like a new flower is blooming. The roots are white tubers that actually taste a bit like cucumbers, thus its name, Indian cucumber root. Here we have sundew, Drosera rotundifolia. It's in the sundew family. It has small white flowers that haven't quite opened in this picture, and rosette leaves. Rotunda means circle, so they're in a circle of leaves. It grows in acidic boggy habitats where there are low nutrients. This plant is also carnivorous. It gives off a sickish sweet perfume, and it has sticky flypaper-like leaves. There are hundreds of long tentacles that have this mucilage at their tips and secrete digestive enzymes, and it becomes an insect trap, just like a flypaper. The leaf produces more of this sticky substance once an insect lands on it. So if an ant comes to the middle of this leaf where you see all these tentacles, the hairs start to close in on it. Some of the smaller hairs shed a substance that anesthetizes the insect. Then the digestive juices start to work on the ant. It can take from 4 to 5 days to totally digest the ant. Once the ant is digested, the tentacles open up again, release droplets of mucus again. One leaf can digest an average of 3 to 4 times before it dies. Now, Charles Darwin had a love affair with this plant. He was a sundew fanatic. He experimented with all kinds of different materials to see if it would cause plant movement. And he did art with the sundew plant. He really found that the plant would only react to moving objects and objects that had protein. He tried glass and sand. That didn't do anything with the plant. There are over 100 species, and they're noted on every continent. One of Darwin's quotes here was, "I care more about Drosera than the origin of all the species in the world." So he really did have a love affair with this plant. And the last flower that we're going to talk about has a unique property that I might get to show you in a video or may not. It's called the bunchberry, which is a pretty unassuming plant. Cornus canadensis. It's in the dogwood family. It's also called crackerberry because of the noise it makes when crunching the berry between your teeth. What you see here are not petals, but sepals, white sepals. There are 4 white sepals. The tiny flowers are in the center of the plant with 1 petal and 1 stamen. The leaves have distinctive veins of the dogwood family. Often you notice these plants for their red berries in the late summer. They're edible but not tasty. They're eaten by moose and some birds. But this is the peculiar thing about the bunchberry. Pollinators trigger the flower opening. Ants, solitary bees, bumblebees, and syrphid flies. It's the fastest plant on earth to release its pollen by stored elastic energy. The flower, which is the little small pink things you see in the middle, is closed up, but when a heavy insect lands on it, it opens up and the bent stamens in the middle spring straight up and catapult pollen right into the air. So, and then when the flower is open, you can see in the center of the flower this deep purple nectar. Now, I don't know if I can show you this video. I think I probably can't, because if I close the screen to get on YouTube, I will lose you. But in science news, even if you just go on and Google bunchberry pollination, you will see what happens. It is quite magnificent how the pollen just blooms upward. But to go back, a few more things about the bunchberry. It can open on its own if it doesn't have any pollinators land, and it can open and send its pollen out to the wind. It has a whorl of 6 green leaves, sometimes 4 if it's sterile. Colonies can have over 6,000 flowers per square foot. So it is quite a unique plant. And if you get to see that video, right now you'll see them just starting to open. Oops, I'm going to go back now. I'm going to show you here some of my resources, and if you have an iPhone and can use iNaturalist, it's a great way to learn your flowers. If you download that app, you can take a picture and put it on iNaturalist, and it will help you with identity, and they're pretty accurate. These are some of the books I've used: Botany in a Day, National Audubon Society Field Guide to Wildflowers, Your First Field Guide, Never Say It's Just a Dandelion, Newcomer's Wildflower Guide, Stokes Nature Guide, A Guide to Enjoying Wildflowers, Plants of Acadia National Park, and Naturally Curious. And I'm going to end with a quote by Edna St. Vincent Millay. I will be the gladdest thing under the sun. I will touch 100 flowers and not pick one. So that has a lot to say about conservation and observing wildflowers, getting right down to smell, touch, feel, and look with your hand lens, but avoid picking them. So that's the end of my presentation. If you want to have it open to questions, I'm happy to do so.